Oh, right, my penguin. He's very, very sick.
So after Marvel capped off their Phase 3 with Avengers Endgame back in 2019 and were up to their elbows in cash, they announced a whole new wave of MCU content in the form of direct to Disney Plus TV show miniseries. There was going to be more MCU content than ever, and boy were they something. Shows like WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier and Loki and Hawkeye, and a whole lot more to come with equally creative titles. There was a new one coming out like every 3 months. You just couldn't escape these. I mean, Marvel was really feeling itself back then, and frankly, who could blame them? They just came off the strongest run of box office success in the history of Hollywood. Who was gonna tell them no? Certainly not the audience, at least not yet. And as someone that was mostly done with the MCU after Endgame and was feeling the burnout pretty hard, I was actually fairly interested in a few of these shows. Not all of them, mind you. I mean, I can't really muster up any hype for a show about Hawkeye, even if you give me Haley Steinfeld. But for things like WandaVision or Loki, there was a certain amount of interest I had, if for no other reason than the idea of these being one-off, creative, weird little standalone projects that could have more of a personality and more of a voice than your typical Avengers sequel. Plus, with that sweet Disney money, they could have more ambitious goals and set pieces and stronger acting talent and stronger writing talent than your typical superhero TV show, which up to that point was defined entirely by low-budget CW shows like Arrow or The Flash and a few Netflix Marvel spin-offs that range from surprisingly good to completely and utterly forgettable. Does anyone remember Iron Fist? Because I sure don't. Point being, there was genuine new ground to be broken with shows like that could totally open up how these franchises operate in the future, especially in the era of streaming. And then they came out. And to be fair, a lot of what I was hoping for did come true in some ways. Much of WandaVision was a weird, creative, character-focused narrative that felt like it existed for its own sake and had something interesting to say and had unique, fun ways of saying it. Same goes for Loki. There was a lot to love in those shows, but in the end they all collapsed under the weight of their own franchise. WandaVision ended with a typical boring MCU fight where the two characters lobbed different colors at each other, and Loki was forced to feed itself into the Phase 4 tease machine and forego any attempt at a real satisfying ending or arc to the character. They were just more stops in the never-ending MCU train that more often than not seems to just run itself in circles. And as a result, pretty much all of these Marvel shows we've gotten in the past few years feel less like actual shows or spin-offs or miniseries or things that can be enjoyed by themselves, and a lot more just like bland content filler. They're just MCU homework. Like that new Captain America is coming out, and based on the trailers, I'm like, somewhat interested. Seems to have a neat tone and like a Winter Soldier feel, and I'll never get tired of watching dear sweet Harrison Ford look like he'd rather be anywhere else, so I kind of want to watch it, but I never watched Falcon and Winter Soldier back when that came out because I just thought it looked kind of boring. But I know that in order to get what's going on with all that stuff, I pretty much need to watch that show because last I saw, this guy was still Falcon. Not to mention Kurt Russell's kid, who's in that new Thunderbolts movie that I have absolutely no context for either. I guess he's like a fraudulent Walmart brand Captain America or something? I don't know. Point being, I haven't done my MCU homework and now it's long overdue, and this is what all these MCU shows and spin-offs feel like, even if they do have some good stuff going on in them. They're content that either does not need to exist or would be better served in a traditional MCU movie where I'm used to seeing it. It's all excessive bloat that makes following this stupid franchise feel like work. So, when I heard that Colin Farrell's Penguin from the Batman was being spun off in his own HBO miniseries, I was really not all that excited. I didn't think it would be like terrible, mind you, but I just assumed that it would be more of the same filler homework that the MCU had been pumping out for a few years now, and that is the last thing I wanted from my precious baby Matt Reeves Batman universe. I was like, please God, do not ruin this shit for me. I mean, that movie is so goddamn good, and the world it sets up is so strong that I just did not want to see it get milked like the MCU. Okay, it ain't content, it's art, baby. It's not even that I didn't have faith in Reeves and company to make something decent and watchable. In fact, I assumed that it would be good if the same crew was making it, but what I was worried about was not its quality, but it being a sign of WB studio interference in gutting the Batman Part 2 for all of its parts, just so they can package each individual element as a unique piece of content for the empty shelves of HBO Max, or I guess just Max now. Still can't quite get used to that one. I mean, half the time I still call it HBO Go, so yeah. Branding ain't always easy, folks.
Is there such thing as insanity among penguins?
The last thing I wanted was to have to do homework to watch a sequel to a movie that I already saw. So for a while, my expectations for the Penguin remained very skeptical, mostly for my own sanity. It's just safe to not have any expectations for any of this stuff, even if we can't help it sometimes. You know, you hope for the best, embrace for the worst and all that. But then the first trailer dropped, and I was like, shit, this looks really good. And I found myself at the time also getting quite into Batman, like I do sometime every year, and the closer we got to the premiere, the more I just couldn't help myself but get genuinely excited for this show. I mean, I was just chomping at the bit for more of the Matt Reeves Batman universe. It's too hard not to. I mean, we're still 2 years away from the next movie, and Matt Reeves still hasn't finished the goddamn script, so I had to put my hype somewhere, and what better place to put it than with Warner Brothers, right? Thankfully though, this show came out, and I watched it, and yeah, it's one of the best things I've seen this year.
Can you imagine to be remembered like that?
Yep, turns out all my skepticism and worrying was all for naught, because not only does it not fall into any of the traps that I feared it would, but it's just simply on its face the best comic book, superhero, cinematic universe franchise adjacent, whatever you want to call it, show I have ever seen. It is completely unaffected by all the downsides that come with making art in that particular space. It's just a really good show with no strings attached, and out of everything I've seen this year that I've loved and been glad it turned out well, nothing has made me happier than this being as good as it is, because the existence of this show proves that the Batman was not a fluke. The same magic they found in that movie worked just the same here. They were able to do it again, all without succumbing to the temptations so many other shows like it can't resist. And I think a lot of that has to do with Lauren LaFranc and Matt Reeves and Colin Farrell and anyone else who had input having a very clear understanding of what something like this reasonably can and should be. That's why I started this video talking about the way Marvel has handled their own spin-offs and shows. Not just to be the annoying video essayist that has to start every video by drawing a comparison to something that really isn't that relevant to the topic. I mean, that is part of it. I do have to indulge myself, of course, but that comparison is really what stood out to me while I was watching this show. Yes, Colin Farrell and Christian Milioti are amazing, and the story is captivating and unpredictable, and the main characters are incredibly well fleshed out, and the script makes every scene interesting, and the direction is as strong as any show like it, and I'll get to all that. I mean, you know the deal, this is a long video, but the key ingredient to this show is the people making it knowing exactly what it is and how to make it work in a franchise that is driven by what happens in the movies.
When Lauren came in and she pitched what she wanted to do in the first episode, the Alberto thing was one of the first things that she pitched. Dylan and I were just like, that's it. That was a really, really brilliant stroke.
First and most importantly, this show is not required to watch the Batman Part 2. Thank you, Jesus. Now, it certainly gives some nice context and strengthens the identity of Gotham and Oz, and is also, you know, amazing, but nothing so important or earth-shattering happens that would confuse you if you chose to skip it and just jump straight from the Batman Part 1 to Part 2. Because all that really happens in this show is the Penguin becoming the Penguin and seizing the main gang power in the city. That's it. Something that is very clearly told to us is going to happen at the end of the first movie. It's pretty obvious what that is setting up. So if this show didn't exist, or you didn't watch it, and at the start of Part 2, Penguin is now a major power player in Gotham, you wouldn't be shocked because it would just be a natural progression of time after the events of the first film. It's not a series of events that you have to see to believe. It would be like having a whole show showing Gordon becoming the new commissioner, something that would be cool to see, but you would buy either way. So by doing a story like that, the show does not have to pay any time to advancing the greater Batman narrative, or setting up different villains, or tying up loose ends from the movie, or any of that. It is totally optional content that is there simply to enhance and further flesh out the character of Oz and Gotham, and because of that, the show can just be a simple character-driven narrative with clear arcs and a satisfying conclusion. You know, like a miniseries. It's not the dreaded 8-hour MCU homework. It's actually a lot like the original run of the Netflix Daredevil, where it existed in this blockbuster movie universe but didn't have to advance any significant event within it and could just operate in its own corner and do its own thing, which allowed it the freedom it needed to be good. It's exactly what a direct-to-streaming lower budget project should be aiming for. Small scale, character-driven, optional content. So every good choice made in The Penguin stems from this understanding. The weight of the franchise is not on its shoulders. It's just like the first season of The Mandalorian, only unlike The Mandalorian, The Penguin never pressed the nuclear option that Disney did in season 2 with the Luke Skywalker cameo, and then in season 3 with the whole show devolving into complete Star Wars nonsense, and now of course this big franchise movie. They could have very easily thrown in a Battinson cameo at the end of this show to get easy clicks and viral moments of people crying over seeing him shove Penguin into like a trash compactor or something, but they didn't do it. They didn't go for the low-hanging fruit, and the show is all the better for it. I know there are reasonable arguments over how Batman having no presence in this intense citywide gang war being a tad bit unrealistic, which is valid because he'd probably get involved unless something truly insane was happening elsewhere, but keeping the show small scale and not reliant on Batman is, I think, more important than feeling the need to weave him into everything, because once you do that, it fundamentally changes what these spin-offs are and what people expect with them. That's how we got The Mandalorian Season 3, because The Mandalorian Season 2 totally uncorked all those cameos. The more the movies bleed into the shows, the more people start to see them as filling the same space in the franchise as them, which can only lead to complete disaster, or at the best, disappointment. But thanks to the cool heads of Lauren LaFranc and Matt Reeves, the Penguin maintains a very clear identity all the way through till the end. It's not essential, it's not a movie, it's not baiting for a season 2, even though you could do one. It's simply a character-driven miniseries. There's no room for a surprise Batman hallway scene.
If you hate the heat so much, what are you doing in a steam room?
Oh, I ask you, is that an ethical question between crime fighters, competitors, you might say?
But even still, the best intentions and a strong understanding of what the show should be only really matters if the show is good. Thankfully for all of us though, this show is part of the Matt Reeves epic crime saga, which means that despite the fact that it has just a terrible name, I mean for real, what the hell is that? Epic crime. Did 2012 Angry Joe name that or something? I mean, good lord. It might have a terrible name, but by golly, is the content gonna be nice and juicy. Really what it means for the show is that much like the treatment of Bruce Wayne in the aptly named The Batman, the character of Oswald Cobb gets the same focus in The Penguin. Again, we see the revolutionary writing technique of making the focus of the story the guy who's the main character. It's all Penguin all the time, and it is just wonderful. I mean, whether you want to give more of the credit to the writers and directors or Colin Farrell himself, the character is just so much fun to watch. He's up there with Heath Ledger's Joker and anyone else you want to throw in as one of the most compelling, fun to watch comic book villains we've ever seen on screen, which is really interesting because the Penguin is rather unique among the other iconic comic book baddies. You see, usually the kinds of bad guys that we see get adapted on screen and done well are characters that are either criminally insane like the Joker, or people that have superpowers or other godlike abilities that happen to be evil or just stand in opposition to our heroes in some way, like a Magneto. Now these can of course also cross over with characters who are both insane and superpowered like the Green Goblin, but by and large, your typical superhero bad guy is going to embody at least one of these traits. They're either crazy or insanely strong and powerful. I mean, it kind of just goes with the whole territory here. They're called supervillains for a reason. But the Penguin is exceptional in that he doesn't fall into either of these two categories. He's not insane and he has no powers. Not even any like quasi-powers like being a super genius like Lex Luthor or at peak physical human condition like a Batman. Nope, he's just a guy. I mean, he's an asshole, he's a little fucker, and he certainly could use some therapy, and he's very smart and clever, but he's just a regular dude, at least relative to someone like the Joker. He's kind of like the Kingpin, but even Kingpin is like this giant tank who can tangle with other strong characters. Oswald cannot do that. His only exceptional trait, aside from his usual over-the-top aristocratic outfit and vibe, is just that he's grotesque. If being ugly was a superpower, he certainly has it. Now, I bring all this up because him being a relatively normal guy makes him an inherently more difficult character to adapt. At least in this medium, comic book villains thrive on being over the top and colorful and crazy and powered and supernatural and having origins that involve them falling into a vat of something or other. They're wacky, and the best and most iconic ones live on through fans endearing how silly and often memeable they are. And the Penguin does have that in the comics with the over-the-top look and top hat and umbrella and monocle and the whole bird vibe, which allows him to swim in that same pool. I mean, that's how Tim Burton made him work in Batman Returns. That man is totally insane, but in the Matt Reeves universe, they've chosen to go for a much more grounded, serious approach to everything, and therefore their version of the Penguin doesn't have any of those usual trademarks. He's gross looking and he has a waddle, but visually that's all he has in common with comic Penguin. So that combined with his less insane personality and lack of powers makes this particular incarnation of him about as normal and subtle and toned down a quote-unquote super villain you can possibly have. They can't lean on the typical wackiness or whimsy or special effects power shows or crazy costume or super over-the-top performance by the actor. All that is totally out of the question. In order to make him work and get him in that iconic tier they need him to be, they have to write a very strong character and rely heavily on a subtle, emotional performance by Colin Farrell. That's it. They don't have any easy crutch to lean on, which normally really annoys me about these realistic superhero adaptations because filing down those heightened comic book elements more often than not results in very bland characters because you're taking away what makes them fun and stand out, and the writers are usually not up to the task of compensating for that with a strongly written character. You just end up with a Tom Hardy Bane or virtually any MCU bad guy. Watchable and inoffensive, but also boring and forgettable. So the fact that this version of the Penguin not only works, but is in the argument for the best comic book villain portrayal of all time is very impressive. It's not a role just begging to leap off the screen at you, but he does. He has as much presence as Battinson, which is saying a whole lot because, as we all know, shots like this exist.
No, I am. Yeah, I got an idea.
I think the best thing you can say about Farrell's performance is that Oz seems like such a real person. Everything he does is so natural and so believable. He completely disappears into the role. Like, this is not Colin Farrell in any way, and I know the makeup and face prosthetics help a lot with that, like they did with Heath Ledger, but it goes so far beyond just the look. Like, go and watch any other movie he's been in, and you will find no shred of Oz in there.
The last thing I want right now is a kiss from a silly little girl. Oh. Don't cry, Elizabeth. You should thank me. Now you'll have a limp and be more like your father.
Now, I know I sound like I'm just describing the basic function of acting, but this is not the case for most performances. Most actors do not transform like this or act in a way that makes them seem like a complete stranger. You can almost always see the actor in the character, but here, he is a real, living, unique person.
What do you think of this? It's a little air freshener. Aqua Paradise.
He has his own mannerisms and vocal patterns and tics, and his limp is different based on the time of day, since the longer he'd be on it, the more it would hurt him. You know exactly how he feels about a situation based only on his eyes and like little face twitches, and none of it is remotely over the top or exaggerated like a typical one of these characters. He's just playing this authentic guy that, obviously minus the extreme crime stuff, feels like someone you could run into in your everyday life, or at work, or in line somewhere being an asshole. I mean, if you've been out there in the world long enough, you've definitely met someone like Oz who just never stops talking and lives in their own reality, but does have kind of this gift of gab that draws people in. It makes him a weirdly relatable character in a way, despite how evil and uncaring he is, because he comes from such humble means and is, again, kind of just a regular guy that could exist in real life.
Ask for extra pickles and they give me two. So what, a normal amount of pickles is one? Makes no goddamn sense.
So even though he's not a good person and not really relatable on any kind of personal level or even that likable, you're still drawn in by him and want to see him succeed just to see if he can. He's this blunt, blue-collar, hardworking guy that everyone underestimates and has no idea how clever and capable and dangerous he is. It's like if your annoying shithead boss from your part-time job in high school was also capable of taking down the mob. You don't really want him to do it because he's not a good guy and doing that is bad, but you kind of want to see if he can, if for no other reason than just to stick it to everyone who thought he couldn't.
Maybe we don't see eye to eye on every little thing. You know, maybe you don't like me. It's fine. I'm an acquired taste. But I make you money.
And a lot of that charm is, again, obviously due to Colin Farrell simply acting out of this world, but I also love that they wrote Oz as an unambiguous villain. Yes, he's charming and fun and clever and occasionally hilarious, but they never go down the path of making him like an anti-hero, which is something that happens to a lot of these kinds of characters. A lot of times in these comic book movies, what makes a few of the villains become fan favorites is the writers just shifting them into heroes as the story goes along, which is fun sometimes, of course, like with Loki, for example, but when you do that, they cease to be villains, and if your only way to make the audience like a villain is to make them a good guy, then you don't really have a good villain then, do you? A lot of writers are scared of committing to a character like the Heath Ledger Joker that, likable as he may be, is a clear, unambiguous villain that is in no way redeemable. The way they write Oz, though, fits right into that mold. He's impulsive, he's vindictive, he's sadistic, and often dangerously jealous, and literally every choice he makes is done purely for selfish reasons. He shows no real love for anyone, and no matter what he does, he has no remorse. He's not even capable of understanding just how evil he is. It's just who he is down to his core. It's like breathing. He's not some deep thinker. You're never gonna catch him monologuing about his morality or what could have been if life was different or any of that. His philosophy is whatever it takes to get what he wants, and no matter what the cost is to other people, it's worth it. I mean, this is a guy that would sell out anyone for any marginal gain. There's no tragic origin that made him this way, you don't really feel bad for him, and he's never going to change, which sounds like kind of a shallow character, but if anything, it makes him more interesting because he runs so counter to most of the other Batman villains. Half of all Batman villains are tragic, redeemable characters like Two-Face or Mr. Freeze or Poison Ivy, and the other half are people so off their rocker and dangerous that Batman, or frankly anyone, should just kill them for like the long-term safety of the human race. But Penguin is just a scumbag. Quite the exceptional scumbag to be fair, but a guy that is driven by the most basic of reasons. He wants money and power and respect, and that's pretty much it. Where most of Batman's other rogues act as a dark mirror to him in some way, Oz is just fundamentally a different person from Bruce. There is no common ground. They don't live in the same reality like Joker and Batman do, which is why they can coexist in some ways.
Don't let me hurt you.
You better watch it. You know my reputation.
Yeah, I do. Do you?
He is the perfect villain to have linger throughout a series like this because he's never going to be a threat like the Riddler is or the Joker could be. He's a guy that Batman can shake down for information and get to once the bigger fish are fried, but will rarely be Batman's main focus. And none of that is to say that there isn't a lot going on with Oz as a person. He may be simple, but his character has some real layers with his mother, of course, and his fragile ego and his excessive need for validation. He's not underwritten by any means. In fact, it's the exact opposite. I mean, those flashback scenes with him as a kid really reveal just how evil Oz is in a way that no amount of context with him as an adult could do. Because as an adult, he lives in this world with other murderers and psychos and mob guys, so he's not gonna stand out much from the crowd, and the audience being on his side naturally is not going to be horrified if he double crosses some other mob guy and kills him. It's like, so what? This guy is named Johnny Vitti. I fucking hope Penguin kills him. But in those flashback scenes, you see those twisted gears turning in his head from such a young age in a way that opens your eyes to just how dangerous he is. His complete obsession with his mother, his deep, dangerous jealousy, his scary lack of empathy, and most terrifying of all is how sane he is while doing all this horrific stuff. Those scenes really work because you, like everyone else in the show, underestimate Oz and what he's capable of, and it's not until those childhood flashback scenes that you finally realize just how fucked everyone in his orbit is, which then allows the show to go even further in the finale and make him do some truly heinous shit that, in retrospect, you should have seen coming from a mile away. Plot twist, not only is this guy a complete monster, but he's even more of a monster than you thought. That's how you do a fucking villain, baby. You don't need the top hat or monocle or flying umbrella or penguin minions or any of it. You just need a decent script, some makeup, and one really committed actor, and you can make a character as iconic as anyone that wears a cape. And if you do that, you can have your cake and eat it too. The show builds him up in a way that by the end he does have the traditional penguin look and top hat and umbrella and aristocratic vibe, something that if they gave him from the start would have felt silly and not in line with the rest of the world, but by slowly progressing him to this point, they've earned it and were able to make it work even in the hyper-realistic, grounded Matt Reeves universe.
Wise guy, huh? Take this! Jumpin' jeepers! A bulletproof umbrella!
In short, the way they've handled him up to this point is an absolute masterstroke. His character is perfect. Even if you don't think he's the best comic book villain portrayal out there, there's certainly no example of a villain better built up like this. I mean, what they have here with him is special, not only for just being great, but the fact that he's built to stay. They didn't need to kill him off in a blaze of glory or even have him interact with Batman all that much to get him here. It's about as strong of a foundation as you can possibly have. And if he was all the show had to offer, it would still be one of the better things I've seen this year, but he's far from the only thing that blew me away.
Do you remember Carmine's daughter?
Yeah. Sofia. I thought you was still at,
Arkham?
Obviously, the other major standout of the show is the one and only Kristen Milioti as Sofia Falcone, the daughter of Carmine Falcone and someone who wants to take his place at the head of the Falcone crime family. Now, you want to talk about current underrated actors? This woman's gotta be close to #1. I mean, goddamn, I certainly underrated her.
Tell me that I'm too emotional and that I have an overactive imagination and that I shouldn't take things so personally.
Like, I was familiar with her before from How I Met Your Mother and Palm Springs and such, and was happy enough to see that she got a major role in this show, but I did not see this coming at all. From her first scene, she comes in like a hurricane and disrupts everything you think this show is going to be. You see Oz and the state of the Falcone crime family, and you think, oh yeah, he's got this shit in the bag, he'll be on top in no time. And then out from the shadows comes this lady, and every expectation you have goes completely out the window. She's this chaotic, unpredictable wild card that you just can't quite get a read on. And the reason why Milioti is so good in the role is she plays Sofia in a way that constantly has you evolving your own view of her. When she first shows up, she comes off like how people talk about her, where she is this unstable, dangerous killer, someone that inspires fear just by being in the same room as other people. She leans hard into that persona, and for the first few episodes, she is a pretty one-dimensional antagonist for Oz to deal with. But then as we get more time with her, we start to see who she really is and why she actually got sent to Arkham, and Milioti plays her totally differently. Suddenly she's more vulnerable and relatable and a total far cry from who we thought she was. So by the midpoint of the season, she's easily the most likable character on the show and the person you actually want to see get some vindication. And yet her time in Arkham did in a way make her who she was accused of being. She became a killer and left her innocence behind, and the fact that she knows this eats her up inside because she has no identity. She can't go back to how things were, and she hates that part of who she is now is the lies that people told about her. So the only path she has to relief is to just burn it all down. And seeing Kristen Milioti embrace that to hell with everything attitude makes Sofia such a fun character to watch. She eventually reaches a point where she is done with everything and looks like she wants to kill absolutely everyone around her. And not in like a bloodthirsty way, but in like a strangely relatable one. Similar to Oz, her authentic performance makes her someone you want to root for despite everything she wants being chaos and death. It also makes her a great antagonist for Oz because he spent his whole life fighting and clawing his way to this point where he finally has a chance to grab major power while she was born into it and resents it and wants to see it all go up in flames. They aren't really natural enemies and could easily coexist. She could simply take her money and run and he could take over, but they hate what the other represents and they have too much pride, and that's what drives them to tear down Gotham in their gang war. They're both pursuing their own version of justice.
Justice is what matters, and that is what my brother, your nephew, deserves.
She's also just the right amount of crazy without going too far. They ride that line pretty hard, but it stays on rails and makes for a pretty unforgettable character. And me oh my, that yellow dress, ooh, that's something. That's a woman that could fix all of us.
Tina, don't forget your panties.
Meanwhile, in the midst of one of Gotham's darkest moments where chaos rules the streets and the city is desperately trying to hold itself together, we have Vic, a homeless kid whose life was wiped out by the flooding caused by the Riddler and works as the heart of the show since he is the only character not driven by a lust for power or revenge, but simply by survival. When we first see him, he's about as down on his luck as someone can be, and Oz gives him this new lease on life. So he works as the audience's into the criminal underbelly of Gotham. It's a really unique perspective to have in a show like this because people like Sofia and Oz, relatable or not, are still these kinds of large personalities and villainous characters that exist in a comic book universe. They have power and money and have, for the most part, embraced their roles as villains. Same goes for characters like Batman or Riddler or Catwoman or Gordon. They aren't ordinary people, but Vic is. He truly is just some guy. So having a character like him who's not a secret future villain or vigilante, but just an ordinary person trying to survive in the hellish wasteland of Gotham and maybe in a different life could have been saved by someone better, puts in perspective that most of Gotham is desperate and ready to turn to people like Oz if they have to. He's kind of this avatar for the majority of the city's people. He's sad and angry and has lost everything and is hopeless and wants something to change. And in the neighborhood he lives in, the only people offering anything are people like the Penguin. So that's who he turns to even when he has a chance for something else. It helps you believe that Oz is capable of rallying his own gang together because most of the people he rounds up are people like Vic that have nowhere else to turn. It also adds a new layer to the ending of The Batman since we now see a direct victim of the bombing and see how much the city has been ruined by it. It makes Riddler that much more of a villain in hindsight because the scale of the damage he did both to the literal city streets and the morale of its people is larger than you could have ever expected.
I used to live over there.
The east side is cursed.
Vic's presence also helps humanize Oz a lot. You see the two of them bond and be friends and talk about the different ways to dismember a body and bury bodies together and just have a fun, good time. Oz also trusts him with his mother, which is a pretty big deal. So on some level, he clearly does like Vic, but it's also not in his nature to have people like him around because they just make him weaker. It's one of, if not the only real relationship Oz has ever had in his life. So through the eyes of Vic, we get to see Oz be a real person and not just this character of the Penguin, which is essential for the story to work because, like I said, for most of the show, Oz's true evil is hidden, or at least not highlighted as much. Vic allows us to see Oz as a charming gangster that you want to root for until the show finally needs him to really go for it in a few spots, which only makes that ending that much more shocking. You just wouldn't see him as vulnerable or human without Vic.
We used to go there every day in the summer. You know, we'd mix the flavors for a suicide. You ever mix the flavors? Oh, you missed out.
And even by himself though, seeing Vic transform from this nervous, stuttering kid to a resourceful killer is a really interesting part of the story. Again, him being this avatar for Gotham and seeing him turn to crime despite being this otherwise good person shows just how gone this city is and how needed Batman is. If good people like him are going down this path, you can bet your ass that future supervillains are too. Killer Moth is out there turning a few tricks as we speak. And that perspective right there is really what makes this show special. Yes, the primary function of it, similar to the Batman, is to explore this one character, and LeFranc does that really well. That's still the main reason why you should watch this. Colin Farrell and Christian Milioti put on a fucking show for the ages. But unlike most other shows that would be fully reliant on them and not put much effort into anything else, The Penguin also devotes a significant amount of time to building Gotham City as a character. Even more than the Batman did, which up till this came out, I would have said depicted Gotham the best by a mile. You just really get a sense of how this city works and what the people are like and how they're feeling and what the mood is and what the power dynamics are. And through each character, you get to see a whole new perspective of how people live. People like Vic and Francis and Eve give us this window into how the lower class survive in Gotham, how living on the bottom makes them bitter and ambitious and resentful. Most of them have nothing left to lose and are just the right amount of desperate to roll the dice on empowering someone like Oz, a person that could not gain any power if the city was in a better state and is hated by most everyone that knows him, but is this missile that they can aim at the Falcones and the Maronis and City Hall and potentially give them a better life even if they know deep down that he probably won't give it to him. They don't view organized crime the same way that people who don't live in those neighborhoods do. I mean, that's why Oz became the Penguin, because the only guy in his neighborhood that kept order was a gangster, so to him that lifestyle isn't just a good thing, but the only way he knows how to live. And then characters like Sofia and Alberto and Sal and all the other mob heads illustrate just how doomed their situation is. They're all these relics of a power structure that is on its way out and have no awareness of how vulnerable their position is. While they continue to play their games and fight for dominance over the other gangs and their own families, people like Oz are actively working to bring them down altogether. So the more time we spend with them, the more you buy that Oz is more than capable of crushing all of them. They're all clinging to something that no longer exists, and they pay the price for it. And by the time that people like Sofia and Sal realize that, it's too late, and Oz has beaten them. So their only remaining path is to hopefully bring him down with them. So it's no accident that by the end of this show, all the old families and old heads of the gangs get taken down and murdered, because that's what this show was telling us was going to happen the whole time. Every part of Gotham you see in this show is leading you to that point.
You know, Oz, people underestimate you, but not me. I've always known you were capable of more.
the whole thing is just masterfully done. And as much as we can lay praise at the feet of Matt Reeves for getting this whole universe started, and of course having his fingerprints on this show as well, it really cannot be said enough just how great of a job Lauren LaFranc did actually making this work. I mean, it is as tight and polished and as smartly done as any show I've seen. Just like Matt Reeves with the Batman, you see her in the Inside the Episode clips, and she just says all the right things and has such a clear vision for the show. She understands exactly what Gotham is and should be like in this universe.
I knew that the goal of the series by the end was to have him rise to the top or get closer to that goal. But when he achieves power, that he's lost a lot of himself as well.
It's very impressive too, because you look at her IMDb, and while she's been around for a while writing and producing TV, she's never helmed anything remotely on this scale before, so to come in swinging like this, you gotta give it up to her. It is not an easy thing pulling something like this off and pleasing all the nerds. It reminds me a lot of Tony Gilroy with Andor, where somehow a person with real vision and talent was able to helm a show like this for a major franchise, almost like it's a mistake. It's just not a thing you see a lot with IPs like this, so when they come around, I feel compelled to give them their flowers. Okay, they're pretty special. Plus, it's just a lot more fun for me to talk positively about stuff than making these big, negative, this sucks kinds of videos. That's not really fun at all. Well, it is sometimes, actually.
And when you take on the responsibility, great power will come.
So, in the future, if WB does greenlight any other The Batman spin-offs like the GCPD, or Two-Face, or Killer Moth, or whatever, I hope they bring back LaFranc, because between this and wherever Matt Reeves has cooking in the movies, I'm in way too deep now. There's no going back. If any future projects in this universe suck, I'm gonna be pretty devastated. But hey, that kind of emotional investment only happens when something is this good, so I'm not complaining. Just don't fuck it up, okay? Because I'll be ruined and sad and will have to go back to watching all this shit ironically. So yeah, The Penguin, it's pretty good. Let's say 4.5 disgusting, horny Batman Returns penguins out of 5. Pretty good stuff.